You lean close, and the scent almost deceives you. A sweetness of rosewater and violet powder, the perfume of divinity itself. But stay too long, and it turns. Beneath the bloom lies something metallic, something dead. The air you breathe is beautiful and poisonous. Before we unmask the women who turned their beauty into a slow form of self-destruction, take a moment to breathe with us. Carefully, not too deeply. If you're watching from Rome, from Delhi, from Sao Paulo, or from a small town where perfume is still a luxury, let us know below. It's strange, isn't it, how a story from the palaces of old Europe can reach every corner of the world now, a shared breath across centuries and screens. Like, subscribe, and join this gathering of curious souls who dare to peer behind the silken veil of history. The year is 1590. In the private chambers of Whitehall Palace, a mirror framed in ivory reflects the Virgin Queen. Elizabeth III stands motionless as her ladies dab a pale paste onto her face. The light from the hearth flickers, catching the sheen of the mixture. Ceruse, a blend of vinegar and white lead. It dries like porcelain, smooth and ghostly. Beneath it, her real skin, blisters and flakes, eaten alive by the very thing that makes her divine. Her physicians whisper of remedies, but she will not yield. To fade, to wrinkle, to appear mortal, that would be worse than death. A lady-in-waiting murmurs, "Your Majesty, the powder bites." Elizabeth's eyes narrow. Then let it bite. England does not worship comfort. The camera drifts across the chamber. Silver basins of mercury for cleansing, perfumes of civet and ambergris clinging to velvet curtains, fans scented with musk to drown the rot of unwashed bodies. This was not mere vanity. It was ritual, warfare, politics distilled into scent and skin. Every royal portrait was propaganda painted upon flesh, every layer of powder a statement of control over nature itself. But beauty, like empire, demands tribute. Within years, Elizabeth's teeth blackened. Her skin, once luminous, turned parchment thin. Beneath her collars and jewels, ulcers festered. She concealed them beneath thicker paint, the same way her reign concealed the sickness of the state. The court whispered of her glow, but it was the light of decay. Lead reflecting candlelight. Across the Channel, Catherine de' Medici prepared her own alchemy. The Queen of France, widow of Henry II, kept a cabinet of glass vials and Venetian jars, a laboratory of poisons and perfumes. She believed, as many did, that scent could defend against disease, that to breathe through musk and lavender was to ward off the plague. Yet the mixtures she favored were tinctured with mercury and camphor, essences that shimmered like salvation and killed like betrayal. Visitors to the French court often remarked on the fragrance that preceded her, a sweet fog that lingered even after she passed. Some said it was her shield, others her weapon. In truth, it was both. Catherine's perfumers were rumored to design not only her signature scent, but also the poisons that silenced her rivals. She carried perfumes in golden pomanders that swung from her waist, little worlds of scent and secrecy. Whether she ever used them as weapons remains uncertain. But in the court of the Medici, even breath could be deadly. The 17th century perfected this paradox. Beauty became a performance of endurance. The ladies of Louis XIV's court painted their faces in layers so thick that smiles cracked the surface. The air of Versailles, heavy with lavender and sweat, shimmered like a mirage of purity. Beneath the silks, corsets drew ribs inward until breathing was a privilege. A queen might faint in public and call it grace. There is a letter, written by a court physician in 1683, describing a duchess whose perfume clouded the air so that candles dimmed. He wondered aloud if her lungs might be gilded inside. The irony was cruelly poetic. The pursuit of eternal bloom brought rot. What drove them, these women of power and intellect, to embrace poison as beauty? Was it fear of aging, or something deeper? In a world where the body was a battlefield for politics, purity, and lust, Perhaps pain was the only currency of worth. The skin became scripture, every blemish erased with substances that whispered, "You are more than flesh. You are myth." The echo of this vanity still haunts modern mirrors. The ingredients have changed. Arsenic traded for silicone, mercury for microcurrent. But the hunger remains the same: to conquer time, to sculpt perfection, to pretend the bloom never fades. The last image lingers. The death mask of Elizabeth I, her face frozen in alabaster stillness. Beneath the pallor, the lead remains, entombed with her bones. The scent of her rosewater has long vanished, but the poison lingers, not in the air, but in the legacy she left behind. The music fades into a single heartbeat, faint, metallic, echoing under marble. Somewhere a curtain sways, and for a moment it almost smells like roses again. Then the air turns cold. The silk rustles, jewels glimmer, and something stirs beneath it all. The camera glides through the gilded halls of Versailles, where chandeliers blaze like captured suns and powdered courtiers drift in slow, glittering motion. But lean closer, and the illusion begins to twitch. Beneath the velvet, lace, and perfume, the bodies of Europe's most powerful women are alive. Not with grace, but with infestation. It begins at the crown of the head. The towering wigs, monuments of hair and wax, were marvels of craftsmanship and perfect nests. At court, a woman's height was a measure of her influence. Her hair, a structure so elaborate it required scaffolding of wire, ribbons, and pads of sheep's wool. Into this labyrinth crawled lice, burrowing into seams where human skin met animal fat. The wigs were rarely removed, sometimes for weeks. When they finally were, attendants discovered tiny skeletons of fleas baked into the pomade, their legs frozen in ambered grease. Marie Antoinette's hairdresser, Léonard Autier, was said to begin each morning by inspecting her coiffure for disturbances. He would lift the powdered curls with a comb, sniff, and murmur, "Her Majesty has visitors again." The Queen, unfazed, laughed it off. The spectacle of her hair was more important than the life crawling through it. Her wigs were architectural feats, ships in full sail, gardens of silk flowers, even miniature landscapes adorned with waxed fruit. But as the candles melted overhead, the wax binding her curls would soften, releasing the faint, oily scent of rancid fat. Versailles itself was no cleaner. Beneath the gold leaf and brocade, the palace swarmed. The court ladies dabbed perfume onto handkerchiefs not to delight, but to defend. The stench of sweat, urine, and rotting food clung to the air, sweetened only by musk and civet. Fleas leapt from fur-lined capes to bare ankles, tracing invisible lines between monarch and servant, duchess and dog. It was said that Louis XIV's greyhounds carried as many parasites as the courtiers who kissed his hand. In England, the problem wore a different crown. At Whitehall, Queen Anne's attendants dusted her wigs with starch so thick it fell like frost. By evening, her hairline shimmered with a halo of white powder. Not just cosmetic, but camouflage. The lice were relentless. Physicians prescribed vinegar rinses, yet these were deemed unfitting for royalty. Bathing was weakness of the flesh. To wash too often was to admit impurity, and so they scratched discreetly, behind fans and folded letters, smiling as though the gesture were elegance itself. There survives a diary entry from the Duchess of Marlborough, noting that during an audience with the Queen, Her Majesty's hand did tremble as though seized by invisible torment. The courtiers knew better than to comment. The scratching continued beneath layers of silk, the sound masked by laughter and the rustle of gowns. In Spain, the Infanta Margarita, the child immortalized by Velázquez, wore stiff collars so tight they trapped heat around her neck. Beneath the ruff, lice thrived, feeding on the tender skin hidden from light. The painter, so obsessed with light and shadow, must have known. In Las Meninas, her gaze is serene, but her scalp beneath the gold curls might have been burning. To the courtiers of Europe, discomfort was proof of dignity. To suffer was to be superior. They transformed their itching, their sores, their crawling skin into choreography. When a duchess tilted her head gracefully, perhaps it was not flirtation, but an attempt to crush a parasite beneath her pearl comb. The grotesque irony was that these same women were worshipped as arbiters of cleanliness, their portraits radiant with purity. They held audiences in rooms filled with vermin, their perfumes masking the slow fermentation of flesh beneath corsets and wigs. The court was a stage, and every body upon it a decaying prop dressed in splendor. Yet denial has its own scent, sweet, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Perfume became armor, fashion became deception. The more the body betrayed itself, the more magnificence was demanded. Lace grew wider, wigs higher, gowns heavier, until every inch of suffering was buried under ornament. They did not simply hide the filth, they built empires upon it. And still the insects returned. There are records of ladies keeping small ivory combs concealed within jeweled cases, designed to rake through wigs mid-banquet. Some even kept pet fleas, enclosed in tiny gold cages, as if mocking their own helplessness. The line between decoration and infestation blurred. A court where life and decay danced side by side. A chronicler of the French court once described watching a lady's powdered wig shift during a sermon. He thought at first it was a trick of the light until he noticed the fine ripple moving through her curls. The sound of scratching echoed faintly beneath the organ's hymn. By the dawn of the 18th century, new fashions promised relief. Lighter wigs, cleaner linen, scented pomades made with citrus instead of fat. But it was too late. The rot had sunk into the ritual itself. Cleanliness was no longer purity, and perfume no longer innocence. The body had become a kingdom besieged from within. As the camera retreats from Versailles' glittering corridors, the perspective inverts. Chandeliers fade, and the light sinks to the floor. There, in the shadows beneath the queen's throne, something small scurries. A single flea, pausing on marble polished by centuries of denial. It waits. The cathedral bells toll, slow and sonorous, rippling through the morning fog. The incense drifts like smoke from a battlefield, sweet at first, then cloying. Candles hiss and crackle, their wax dripping like flesh melting from bone. In this world, the air is holy, and the body suspect. Cleanliness, once a sign of purity, has become an act of rebellion. It begins in Spain, at the court of Queen Isabella, the so-called Mother of the Faithful. Her chambers smell of myrrh and cold stone. Servants whisper that the queen has not bathed in years. The royal physicians advise only the washing of hands. Never the entire body, for water seeps through skin and awakens sin. Isabella believed this with the certainty of a creed. A pure soul, she once told her confessor, requires no bath. The camera glides past her silken bed, where linen yellowed by time bears the faint outline of sweat and sanctity. Her garments, layered and perfumed with violet, conceal more than flesh. They conceal conviction. For in this age, the clean body was the devil's invitation. To scrub too deeply was to caress temptation. To admire one's own reflection was to look directly into pride. The doctrine spread like wildfire dressed in gold. Priests preached that God despised the flesh's pleasure and freshness, that disease was divine discipline. Filth became a badge of humility. Pilgrims returning from Jerusalem carried not relics, but infections. Proof, they believed, of contact with the sacred. In the heart of Madrid, noblewomen powdered themselves with crushed flowers to smother the odor of decay. The scent of sanctity was the scent of death, sweetened, sanctified, and sealed in lace. Monks in their cells refused water altogether, scrubbing only their souls with confession. The dirt beneath their nails was a scripture of endurance. When empire followed faith across the seas, this gospel of grime went with it. In the Americas, missionaries carried both the cross and the stench of holy austerity. They looked upon the ritual baths of the Aztecs, clear pools where men and women purified their bodies daily, and saw not health, but heresy. To bathe was to honor the body. To honor the body was to mock the crucifixion. At a Franciscan mission in Mexico, a friar's journal records the words, "We forbade them the river, for the devil dwelt in reflection." The people obeyed, and the river banks fell silent. The once clear waters, once filled with laughter and song, grew stagnant, like the souls of those forbidden to touch them. The same story unfolded in the Philippines, in the Andes, in the Caribbean, continents where heat demanded water and faith denied it. The conquerors' bodies reeked under armor and cassocks, their sweat salted with the dust of the sacred. The newly converted, deprived of cleansing, fell ill, and yet the priests called it proof of divine favor, the body punished so the soul might rise. Inside the convents, the paradox deepened. Nuns, sealed from the world, lived in air thick with wax and human musk. Some wore hair shirts that drew blood when they prayed. Others kept worms in small jars and pressed them to their skin as penance. One abbess in Toledo was said to keep her unwashed shroud from childhood, believing its smell of rot drew angels close. What strange comfort did they find in decay? Was it devotion, or defiance of mortality itself? If dirt was the mark of the chosen, then suffering became currency. The clean, the perfumed, the self-caring were cast as vain. To ache, to rot, to smell of the grave, that was piety. And yet, not all obeyed. In secret, some women broke the holy taboo. In the cool silence of night, they would slip into marble tubs, pouring water scented with herbs forbidden by confession, rosemary for memory, lavender for mercy. The steam rose like confession unspoken. They washed in fear and ecstasy both, trembling as though angels might burst through the door. By the 17th century, the rest of Europe watched in horror. While the courts of France and England drowned themselves in perfume to disguise disease, Spain clung to its sacred filth. The Inquisition branded cleanliness as the mark of heresy, a custom of Moors and Jews. The very act of bathing became treason. In the records of 1602, one woman in Seville was denounced not for sorcery, but for smelling of soap. The irony was merciless. The empire that spread the gospel of purity birthed plagues in its palaces. The people prayed harder, fasted longer, believing the sickness to be heaven's test. Priests blessed the dying with hands that had never been washed. Churches overflowed with the scent of incense and rot, a mingling of sanctity and decomposition that no candle could disguise. Still, faith endured. They called it holiness, not horror. The dirt clinging to their robes became relics, the sores on their bodies stigmata. Their suffering was eternal currency in the eyes of God, and the greater the pain, the greater the promise of paradise. The camera pans upward. A cathedral ceiling painted with saints in golden light, each one spotless, unblemished, radiant. The sound of the bells swells again, drowning the coughs and cries below. And as the incense thickens, obscuring the altar, the image begins to blur, the saints' faces melting into the smoke. When the haze clears, only shadows remain. The pews are empty, the candles snuffed out, the air still heavy with something you can't quite name. It smells faintly of earth, holy earth, and of all that was lost to it.